Hey guys, before we start this review, I'd just quickly like to let you know that for this episode of the review, I'm going to be trying out a new style for my backgrounds. Basically, this is because the amount of editing, which for the last review was upwards of 15 hours, versus the finished product, I don't really think is worth it. So instead of having a caption for almost everything I say, like in the last episode, I'm going to be cutting down on most of the captions and only putting the really important ones on screen. And so if we do it like this, I should be able to have these reviews out quite a bit faster. So let me know in the comments if you're happy with this new style, if you'd rather the old style, or have any other ideas I could use. Any help I would greatly appreciate. So let's get into the review.
Hey, welcome back to MCReviews. Today we're going to be looking at the first 5 tracks of Monstercat 02 early stage. The tracks are going to be Some Wobbles by Ephixa, Triceracops by Halo Nova, Light Pollution by Stephen Walking, Rock the House by Matduke, and Blow Exxplode by Arion. I'm not really sure what that is. But yeah, you might have noticed upon clicking this video that it was a bit shorter than you'd expect a 15 track review to be, judging by the length of my last 7 track review, which was Monstercat 01. But there's a very good reason this is shorter than that. So if you saw my channel update I put up on last Wednesday, I think it was, you'll already know this, but I'm changing the format of my reviews. This is because, looking back retrospectively at my last review, it was really just way too long to keep the format of the video going into the later albums. So now, instead of reviewing the whole album in one video like I was, I'll be doing 5 songs of the reviewed album per episode. This means that this episode will be the first of 3 reviewing Monstercat 02, and from album 12 onward there'll be 6 episodes in each full album review. But onto the album. It's interesting that this album has over double the tracks of the last one, and was really only released 50 days, or 1 month and 19 days, I believe, after the first album. And this really shows that from really the very start, Monstercat was a well-known and respected enough label to double their artists, with 7 more dedicated artists coming in the small space of time that it took for Monstercat 2 to come out. The artists who joined the family on 2 were Matduke, who I'd love to give a brief description of, but I really don't know him at all. Noisestorm, who is one of Monstercat's best and most interesting electro artists, I reckon. Eminence, who is a surprisingly inventive, at times, house and trance producer. 2/3, who is one of my favourite D&B artists, Obsidia, who likes to be loud, it would seem, and Project 46, who is another house producer in a similar vein to the likes of Halberg, Vicetone, that sort of thing. But yeah, let's get on to the first track of Monstercat 02, Some Wobbles by Ephixa. So, in the intro to this track, there's what I call like a mysterious sounding space or sci-fi type melody, which is quickly incorporated with some synthy backing and a nice short beat. This intro I really like. The build up is pretty cool. It's really fast. It's over in like a second, but it's basically just a drum break which goes straight into the drop. But then we get into the drop, and the drop of the song, yeah, you know, I really don't like it, or at least I don't like the start of it. This is just because the main melody or the dubstep bass, it's just not very good. It's very drawn out and slow. He also quietens down the interesting beat and replaces it with the generic dubstep beat and takes out the synthy backing and the sci-fi melody, which were the 2 parts that from earlier, which I really liked. Then it goes into the second part of the drop, which is better. The basses are made more, I guess, wobbly and faster, as the title would imply they were. I had a friend describe this song sort of as alien dubstep, and I reckon this part really fits that bill nicely. The third part of the drop I really like. He adds in the sci-fi melody from the start of the song, and he makes the basses sort of pulse in and out, as well as there's a fair few drum breaks which sound really good. This part is really cool and adds quite a bit of depth to an otherwise quite basic drop. The fourth part of the drop is basically just the first part again, but with the sci-fi melody layered under it. This bit's okay, but the basses are still not great. The fifth and final part of the drop, it's a pretty repetitive 30-second or so section of some faster basses repeating themselves and a few deeper pitched ones thrown in there as well. It then smoothly comes out into the into the mid section of the song, which does sound very similar to the intro with the melodies and the synths and the beat. I really, really like this part. It's nice and chill, nice and laid back. But that part doesn't last long as it goes very quickly straight back into the drop. So the second drop is basically the same as the first drop from what I can gather, and normally this would be something which would really ruin the song for me, but in this example it's not quite as bad just because of how many times the drop changes. But yeah, so it basically just repeats that same thing, goes through the same process that we talked about earlier, with the bits I do and don't like. But the song ends with another more chill part that sounds a bit like the intro with that sci-fi thing. So I really, really do like the sci-fi space type theme the song was going for. I think in that respect, Ephixa really nailed it. And as much as some of the individual parts of the drop I don't really like, the fact that they're constantly changing really keeps it fresh and interesting. I reckon the song is way better than Epixa's last track, which was Dubstep Killed Rock and Roll. It has a lot more variation and complexity. The song shows that really in the time between the two tracks, Ephixa as an artist had grown and evolved quite a bit. And I'm really interested to see what he is able to bring to the table in future tracks. I'm going to be giving some Wobbles 6 out of 10, because I feel that it is really quite original in both theme and sound. I love the amount of variation he brings into the song. From the chill type sections to the very heavy dubstep, it basically has everything in between, and I really like that. I know it's a small thing, but the drum breaks in the song I really love. They do a great job of transitioning between different sections of the song. But for as much as I love some things about the song, I'm not going to be able to give it any higher than a 6. Just because to me, it's certainly flawed. But I do believe it's over the average of this type of dubstep, and I certainly respect what it did and what it was trying to do and what it succeeded in doing.
Okay, moving on to the second track on Monstercat 02, Triceracops by Halo Nova. So I was interested going into this track because if you've seen my review of 01, you'll know that I really liked the Force and I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought that was a really good track, it had lots of variation and it was one of the best of these early heavy dubstep tracks I'd heard. And from what I've gathered, Halo Nova seems to have a really cool style and I really wanted to see how that would transition into his next dubstep track. So the track starts off with a synth type melody with a basic drum and bass beat, as well as a high-pitched vocal chop in the backing. It doesn't last too long, and it soon goes into the build-up, which is pretty short, and there isn't much to say on it, besides the vocal chop gets a bit deeper and the melody escalates. It then drops, and I'm gonna be honest, this drop is really disappointing. It basically does the opposite of what the Force did, where the Force was constantly changing and adding new things. Triceracops is very repetitive, and basically repeats the same melody, bass, beat, and vocal chop over for about 50 seconds. Which doesn't sound that long, but you know, when you listen to the song, it really feels like it. And so the thing is, what it repeats, though I really like, the vocal chops are dark and bassy with some cool scream effects thrown in there. Though still being quite a basic dubstep, I guess / drum step beat. It's quite fast and keeps the song at a nice pace. The basses are decent, they're nice and brooding. It's not impossible for me to like a repetitive song like this. Like, for example, one of my favorite Monstercat tracks of all time is San Holo's Victory. But this track it doesn't have any punch or drive to keep the repetitive nature engaging. But the song then goes into a midsection between the first and second drops, where there is that synth type melody from earlier. It sounds a bit chiptune like, which is what I was expecting, seeing as the last song was full of those type of sounds. This song, less so. It has less of those sort of 8-bit chiptune retro sounds that we heard a lot of in The Force. It keeps the good beat and some of the basses in this midsection. I really like this part. It's nice and atmospheric, and the melody too has quite a bit of variation in its tone and pitch. It then has the same fast build up with just a bit of an added beat, and then we come to the second drop, which as far as I can tell is literally a carbon copy of the first one, which is just really disappointing. I can deal with one repetitive drop or even 2 repetitive drops that are different, but 2 of the same repetitive drops is just not good enough. And so like I said, it just repeats the same drop, then it goes into a midsection between the second and third drops, which is very similar to the earlier midsection between the first and second drops, but the beat is sped up a bit to more of a DMB one, like from the start of the song, and halfway through this mid part, the beat adds on itself and becomes more complex, and this beat there is really, really good. There is another one of the same build-ups. This is from the second drop in the build-up for the third, and then it drops, and thankfully something changed. The main bass and beat get quite a bit faster, but they're still the exact same as earlier, just faster. I guess it is good that it changed and it's faster, but the changes still don't feel very significant at all. It then goes into an outro, which again uses the synth melody from the other, I guess, not drop parts of the song. So to me, this song is really conflicting, because I think literally every individual element of the song I really like. The beats, the basses, the melodies, they're all great. It's just that all of those great elements are all completely overused, where the force was constantly changing, not only in the moment-to-moment sounds of the song, but in both drops. The first was a slower drop, and the second a really fast, heavily melodic chiptune style drop. Triceratops was either doing the same thing in the intro, mid-sections, and outro, or the same thing in the drop. And something I will touch on though is in the, I guess you could call it spooky, the theme that the song has, which it's this theme which is sort of present throughout the drops, with that scream vocal drop and some other darker basses, which I do quite like. But yeah, I was completely surprised by the song. Well, I was expecting Halo Nova to make a very varied, fast, complex song, but I got it was more comparable to that of like Hello from the last album. And so I'm gonna be nice, and I'm gonna give the song a 5. I really wish I could give it a higher score, but any song that basically repeats the same repetitive drop 3 times, no matter how good what it repeats is, it would never be able to get much over an average to subpar score from me.
So, the third track we're going to be talking about from Monstercat 02 is Light Pollution by Stephen Walking. So, the track starts off with a high-pitched electro melody, which soon adds some generic type dubstep drums. Both these drums and melody seem to have common bursts of speed, I'd call it. This is cool and changes up the generic sound that the two elements share with a lot of dubstep. The build-up comes up quite shortly after the start of the song, and it basically just adds the main dubstep bass from the drop and speeds up the drums. You know, it's an alright build-up, it's just sort of your normal thing. Then we come into the first drop, which has quite a melodic dubstep sound. This is probably because the bass, the main bass in the drop smoothly fluctuates a lot in pitch, which basically makes a melody out of the bass. It also seems to have some fast and sudden deeper basses that come in a similar burst fashion to the drums and melody from earlier. Towards the second half of the drop, the melody speeds up quite a bit and adds on itself. This change to the melody I really like. But overall, this drop is just okay. Some of those sudden noises can make it quite interesting, but for the most part the drums and melodies are quite slow and it can drag on for a bit too long. There is then a short mid-section, which is basically the same, from what I can tell, as the intro, just without those short bursts of speed. Then there is what I call the second drop. This one it's more of like a half drop than a full drop, because it pretty much has no build-up, and it isn't quite as climactic as the other drops. It feels more like the mid-section, or the breakdown between the two drops. For this part, the beat is sped up a fair bit, and sounds almost a bit like a Moombathon or a hardstyle beat due to its very repetitive nature. And this mid part is okay, but it's nothing very special. No need to worry, because it doesn't last long before we get into the next quick build-up, which is the same as the build-up of first drop, I think. And like most of all build-ups, it's not great, but it gets the job done for sure. And then it gets into my favourite part of the song, which is the third drop. Now, it starts off pretty much the same as the first few seconds of the first drop, sounding very similar, but I was relieved to hear that a few seconds into the drop, the main melodic dubstep style bass from the first drop, which I would say is the most prominent bass of the song. That bass starts going on a bit of a roller coaster ride of pitch. This really changes the whole feel of the song. Where earlier it didn't make me feel much of anything, this drop feels really dramatic and climactic with the way that the bass changes. As well as that, it also amps up the sudden deeper basses I was talking about earlier. It really ramps them up to 11, making them go really crazy. They sound quite glitchy at times, and I really like that. The drums are also better in this drop, as though they're quite slow and generic, they have lots of drum rolls and breaks to keep the pace varied. The final element of this third drop is the electro melody that has been present throughout most of the song. As I've said before, I don't love it, but most of the time when it is faster and scaling, because the melody sort of speeds up and scales sometimes, I really like that. I especially like it near the end of the third drop. It can almost sound like a future bass melody just because of how fast and the high-pitched nature of the melody. And so all of those elements add up to make the third drop one of the best parts of any song I've reviewed so far in this series. I really, really, really like that third drop. So, as you can probably tell, I quite like this song. Not all the time, but most of the time I do like it. Up until the third drop, the song was not quite getting there for me, but once we get to the third drop, the song really stepped it up a notch, and pretty much from 1 minute and 58 seconds, I was not expecting it at all to get this good, but as soon as that drop hit, whoa, it was so good. And I really do think that that drop was the perfect way to wrap the song up. It still kept what made the first and second drops quite cool, and just made it so much better. It was a great climax to an all-round decent song. So I'm going to give Light Pollution a 7 out of 10, and this is bordering more towards a 6 in my mind because of everything excluding the third drop. But that drop really brings it up a notch and makes me feel comfortable giving it a 7. But so far I've been pretty impressed by Stephen Walking. I had really low expectations for him, and it is really nice to have that stark contrast to actually be liking what I expected to hate. So far I think he might be my favourite artist of the bunch. So, let's hope that he can keep up the good work.
Okay, so onto the fourth track of the album. It is Matduke's first track on Monstercat, Rock the House. And before I start this review, I'd just like to say that last episode on my review of Ep.1, I might have been a bit harsh to the other hard dance song I reviewed, which was Captivating by Nelio. As in the few weeks since I released that video, I've been starting to appreciate hardstyle a bit more, and with songs like Deep in the Night coming out with that hardstyle drop for the third, I believe it is, and I really, really like that bit, I've really been starting to maybe turn around on it a bit. So I'd like to, if I could, retract my score of 2 that I gave to Captivating and change it to a 3, just mainly because after listening to it again, I realized that first and fourth drop melody is actually really cool. But anyway, let's get on to the song that we're reviewing right now, Rock the House. And I'm gonna be honest, I barely know Matduke as an artist, so I'm probably not gonna have much insight into him yet. But as time goes on and we hear more of his tracks, I'm sure that we're gonna get to know him a bit better. So this track from start to finish is definitely hard dance, in the sort of, I guess you could call it ravey way, which isn't normally something I'm a huge fan of, but I actually do think that in this song in particular, it works quite nicely. So the track starts off with a build up, that's like the first thing that happens in the track, it's a build up, it's a bit strange, but it basically drops into what I would call the intro of the song. And so what it drops into is actually really interesting to me, because though the beat is definitely hard dance, in this part it almost sounds more like drum and bass, just a very loud drum and bass. It's because the beat is, it's not just the boom, 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 boom that you hear in a lot of hard dance. It has a different timing to it, and I actually really like that. On top of that drum and bass style melody, it has a bunch of fast ravey melodies, which I guess you could almost call like sci-fi sounding. And these melodies, they're fine, they're cool, and lots of them come in and out at different times, which is cool. And honestly, I think that this intro part is actually really cool and quite inventive for hard dance, especially with the beat. It then calms down for a few seconds by taking out the drums and most of the melodies, except for one dramatic sounding melody, which we're going to be hearing a lot of in the future. It then quickly goes into a pretty standard build-up, which quickly drops. Well, I guess it kind of drops. I say that because what I call the first drop definitely has a build-up and does drop, but then there is, within 10 or so seconds after that drop, another build-up, which I guess you could say stacks on top of that first drop. The first drop is very brief and basically does the exact same thing as what came before it. It has no beat and uses that dramatic melody from earlier. And like I said, it quickly starts building up again to what I would call the first main drop. So the build up to the first main drop is kind of really bad, except for one thing, which I'll get to in a second. There's a vocal chop, which is basically repeating Rock the House, which builds in pitch the more the build-up goes along. And to me, at least, this vocal chop's really annoying, and I really dislike it. Besides that, everything is what you would expect from a hard dance build-up. This is except for one thing that I do think is really cool, and I know it's small, but I do reckon it's really cool. At the very end of the build-up, there's a small little melody that just drops in pitch like crazy. It sort of builds in pitch, and then just as the build-up stops, it sort of almost like deflates. And that's sort of the best way of describing it I can think of. But I reckon if you listen to it, you know what I'm talking about. I really like that. I reckon it's very cool. It then drops, and this is where I start feeling really weird about the song, which is the first main drop. Because the drop is really, it's a very generic, ravey, hard dance drop, and I really should hate it, because everything's telling me it's terrible. But there's something in it that makes me like it. And this something is the melody. It's the same dramatic melody from earlier, but he jammed it into a synth. It's just that the melody is so fast and dramatic, and it slides around with the pitch a lot. I really like it. The other things I like in the drop are the occasional drum breaks and the speed of the beat. It's fast enough to keep me interested, even if I don't love the beat itself. But I'm sure you can imagine what I'm going to say next. And I just still don't like that beat very much. That beat sort of holds the song back. And call me a biased D&B fanboy, but I just think this song would have worked so much better with a drum and bass beat. I'm saying this because the dramatic melody actually really reminds me of Faint. And that made me think, what would this song sound like if it had a faint drum beat? And then I just reckon that would have been really cool if it was like that. But, you know, it's still fine the way it is. Putting my stupid biases aside, I really do think this drop was pretty damn awesome. And my only big issue with it was that it is a bit repetitive and doesn't change for quite a while. Thankfully though, after about 45 seconds, it does change. It changes the melody and makes it more into a bit of a burst style of melody rather than the more drawn out melodies present in the previous part of the drop. It keeps the same beat, but the melody changes enough that it's alright that the beat's the same. And I like the melody just as much as the last one. This one just has a bit of a different feel to it. It feels more urgent, and that's something I really like. I feel like this is a very good example of how to change a drop to keep it more interesting. It keeps the theme and feel of what was earlier, and it smoothly transitioned into the song, so not to sound jarring, but it still changes the song dramatically. The song then again changes drastically by going into the midsection between the two main drops, which has no beat and basically only a melody that reminds me a lot of strings in its smooth nature. And though I don't think it is strings, whatever it is, it's really cool. It soon introduces some piano on top of the string type sounds, which plays that dramatic melody from earlier. This calmer section, it's pretty damn amazing and contrasts so nicely between the two high octane drops. It calms the listener while still keeping them on their toes because it keeps that dramatic sound. But then that build up with the annoying Rock the House vocal chop comes in, but this time with that piano layout over it, which is nice, but the build up's still sort of just a bit, you know, a bit crap. And then, unfortunately, it repeats the first main drop, which isn't the worst thing, because at least I really like what it is repeating, but it was a bit disappointing. After about 45 seconds of that repeated drop, where you're expecting it to change and incorporate that cool urgent melody from the first drop, it instead finishes off the song with pretty much the only part of the song that I really dislike. And in all honesty, I have no idea how to describe this portion of the song. If you don't already know what I'm talking about, it's basically the last 37 seconds of the song. It takes out the cool dramatic melody, keeps the beat, which I don't love, and adds a weird melody that I don't really know how to describe. But yeah, that was Rock the House by Matduke. In a similar way to The Force by Arion, this song blew my expectations away. I saw hard dance from the early albums and wrongfully groaned about reviewing this song, when in reality this song is awesome. I pretty much love everything except for the small bit at the end and the build-ups. The melodies are so fast and dramatic, and the beat even has its moments that I really like too. I especially like the string section in the middle, and the speed of the song reminds me of what I love so much about drum and bass. And if there was one word I could use to describe this song, it would be climactic. This is because it can take quite a while to get to the highest point, but once it does, it's really worth the wait. So I'm going to be giving this song a 7 out of 10, because I really like it. I can't give it any higher because of the flaws we've discussed earlier, but those elements are small and mostly ignorable. The good stuff is just so good and so cool, and hopefully this can be the song that truly breaks my bias against hard dance. I feel like I'm gonna see the light when it comes to hard dance soon, but I'm actually really interested to see what Matduke can do in later albums, and I'm gonna keep an eye on him for sure. So I would definitely recommend this song to anyone who likes hard dance, and even some people who don't like it, like me. So, the last track that I'm going to be reviewing today is the Electro House Blow Explode by Arion. This is Arion's second electro track on Monstercat, and it definitely holds that electro sound close to heart. So the track kicks off with a generic electro beat and really not much else. It soon adds some background noises with a heap of reverb, and that is a really nice touch, I reckon, as well as a cool brooding backing melody that smoothly makes its way into the song. The song also does that thing where various parts of the song pan between left and right hand side of your headphones periodically. And while I like that most of the time, I do think it's a bit overused and can be slightly annoying in this track. But that is nowhere near as annoying as the next element that's introduced, and that's the vocal chop. The vocal chop is, in my opinion, potentially the worst vocal chop used in any Monstercat song I can think of, and I'm being serious when I say that. It's high-pitched, and it reminds me of something Skrillex would use, and I honestly can't stand it. While the song is introducing this vocal chop, it starts building up with quite a housey build-up. Reminds me a bit of house, reminds me a bit of trance, where the melodies change to more of a pulsy sound, and they build in pitch as the drums increase in speed. The build-up is fine, and besides the vocal chop, and that is a big besides, it's pretty inoffensive. Thankfully though, when it drops, the vocal chop is removed, and basically the entire song changes into a very electro house song. Where before it could have been electro or maybe even trance, this drop definitely cements itself in the electro house genre. Thankfully, I quite like electro house, and this drop is fast enough to keep the repetitive nature that comes with this style of electro house mostly ignorable. The beat is hard and loud and quite fast for electro house, which is good, and it keeps the song at a good pace. The main bass, which is definitely the most prominent part of the drop, changes enough and is fast enough to keep it interesting, and there are lots of nice touches thrown in, as well as a decent backing vocal chop that thankfully isn't saying anything. And that vocal chop keeps the song at a nice pace as well. Then we get to the second half of the drop, and it's really cool, except it reintroduces that vocal chop that I hate so much. This part of the drop has what I would call lots of small build-up type things. They aren't actually build-ups, but they're short periods where the pitch quickly ramps up and then drops back again into the electro house bass. Those small build-ups would be really cool and a great way to keep the drop interesting if that damn vocal chop wasn't also ramping up in volume as they ramp up in pitch. And the vocal chop gets even worse as he adds more to it. But that's the first drop in a nutshell, and yeah, I quite like it. Literally everything except for the vocal chop I really dig, but that vocal chop just drags it down quite a bit. And so once the drop ends, we get into the mid-section of the song, which basically consists of two elements. The first being a really cool strings type synth pad, I think that's what it is, and the other element is the vocal chop, which constantly repeats throughout the whole midsection of the song. And that makes this pretty much the worst part of the song, in my opinion, just because that vocal chop is so constant and it repeats so many times. And this is also where I think that left and right panning is the most overused and starts to get quite annoying. Then we get to the second build-up, which is basically just the vocal chop and that synth pad, as well as a note that builds in frequency to show that it's actually building up. And there's not really much else to say here, other than the build-up is worse than the first, and it's pretty basic. Then we get to the second drop, and I reckon it's pretty cool, because 95% of it is pretty much the same as the first one, except for the first half, before the build-up style section. There is one of those build-up type noises from the second half, just reversed, which is layered over what we already heard from that portion of the first drop. And I reckon that's pretty cool, how he keeps the first drop in the first half of the first drop, I should say, but changes it enough. But my favourite part of this drop is a very subtle yet very nice change in the second half of the drop, or the build-up style section, where there are these dramatic style strings in the same sort of way that Fool uses strings in many of his second drops. These strings are added under all the build-up type noises, and I really love that. It brings a nice level of complexity to this part of the song, but by far the best bit of the second drop is that the vocal chop isn't used once throughout the drop. The song comes to a nice end by basically stripping everything from the song except the strings and ramping it down from there. and it's a nice ending. Okay, so that was Blow Explode by Arion. And goddamn, I really, really want to love this song. Almost everything except for the build-ups, I really do love. The song has a great fast pace and really pumps you up. The electro house parts have great variation to keep them interesting, and there are always things changing. But that goddamn vocal chop, it just drags the song down so much. It's so overused and annoying. It's pretty much my only issue with the song, but it's such a big issue that it comes close to ruining the entire song. So I'm gonna give Blow Explode a 4 out of 10. And I really, really wish I could give it a higher, because for the most part, the song sits more in the 7 or 6 or 8 mark. But like I've said countless times, that vocal chop just drags it so far down that I can't even give it a mediocre score. And I know people are gonna be mad at me for thinking that just one element of the song mostly ruins it, but if there is something I dislike in a song that is that intrusive and is used that often, it's really gonna hurt it for me. So sorry to anyone that may like that vocal chop, but it just doesn't work for me at all. And so, as much as I hate some of what Arion is doing in this song, he does show that when it comes to electro house, he does know what he's doing. And I do hope that he stays on this sort of hard electro house type path, as he seems to be really good at it. Let's just hope that next time he doesn't use as many vocal chops. So, to wrap things up, thanks everyone for watching. The next episode will be reviewing the next 5 tracks on album 2. Those tracks are Obsession, Airwaves, Metropolis, Tan Popo, and Totally Radical. And by the time you're listening to this, I've probably already started working on them, so you can be expecting that in the next week or 2, I'd think. And so yeah, please leave how you feel about each of these tracks that I've reviewed today in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.